All right, we have all of us here that are going to be here. All right, I will call to order the Committee of the Whole meeting for Monday, June 28th, 2021. First up are recommendations for the Charter Review Commission.
And Nancy, this is Crystal.
Yes.
Sheila Vitale has joined the call, and she's available to speak to those resolutions.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, thank you. So Sheila, do you want to speak to the recommendations?
Yes, thank you. So the Charter Review Commission has completed our work. We reviewed the charter several times, had some really good conversations, had a lot of areas that were presented to us for review. We have landed on 7 charter changes to be presented to the electorate in November. All these changes were unanimously approved by the committee, and I'm happy to answer any additional questions you have as to each change. In general, they are mostly some cleanup areas, a few areas that we're clarifying, a couple areas as far as the mayor and both the term and the clarifying which election and running in the primary. Similarly, a few things with city council to ensure that they were in the resident for the requisite amount of time, and just clean up some of the language that was in there with that prior change. The fire and police one is really clarifying a few items, kind of bringing it up to date, identifying both of the fire departments that serve our city to make sure those are clear in there, and removing anything that can be problematic between the charter and some of the collective bargaining agreements. So a lot of it was just some little cleanups to help the city continue to work efficiently and in the best interest of the citizens. So I'm happy to answer any specific questions that you may have.
I had a question about the one for that the new departments could be created without council approval.
So we've had lots of discussions on those, understanding that there is a process in which the council approves the budget and funding. So any department that the mayor would want to create in order for efficiency or combining an area, that the mayor could present that to council, but ultimately council has the ultimate authority to not fund a department, which would really make it non-existent. So understanding that there is that nuance in there, that ultimately city council funds all the departments in there, that is the control that we thought was the balance, and would allow some flexibility with the mayor's office in determining what the needs were for the city. So we did have quite a bit of discussion on that one. We talked with the mayor, we talked to several others about it. We met for the past 4 months. In May and June, we met weekly. Before that, we met every other week. So there were lots and lots of discussions on this, and understanding that there is that ability of council to not fund a department is the ultimate check and balance.
Right. I was thinking that, but I didn't know if that was, I was interested in the reasoning. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Any other questions?
Nancy?
Yes, Steve.
Hi. Sheila, I just wanted to say thank you. I don't know whose idea this was, but being able to see the proposed change and the reasoning in 3 columns, that was very, very handy in being able to look at that. So thank you for that. I'm curious, I think I'm neutral on it, but I'm just curious, what was the discussion or the reasoning behind changing qualifications for council from 1 year to 15 months? So
the prior version, the way it was written, said a council member must run when, a public person could run too. So we wanted to make that clarification. The 15 months came in during the last charter review. We wanted to make sure that there was residency for 1 year. Then we learned during this charter review that there are different filing deadlines. So the way it was originally proposed 5 years ago was assuming we didn't have write-in candidates, and understanding that, a traditional, for lack of better words, candidate that would file a petition in August and then run, that is about 15 months prior to election day. However, write-ins have a much different schedule. So we wanted to keep the spirit of what the electorate voted on 5 years ago in there. So that's why we landed on the 15 months. So that actually hit that the timeline that was initially proposed 5 years ago, and took out the nuance with, do you register appropriately, and what about the write-in candidates and all those.
I gotcha. Well, that's good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sheila?
Yes.
Here.
I had one on the section 4.03 qualifications, a candidate for council. And I think that there potentially are some people that are planning to run that maybe when I looked at this, might not be able to run. For instance, a council member shall hold no other elected public office, any other compensated office or employment with municipality, other compensated public employment which could be in conflict with the office council member. So let's say you have somebody that's planning to run for council and yet is in the office and a high level office of someone who is in the federal government. Does that preclude them from being able to run?
So my understanding in talking with Ray, who has been very instrumental in assisting us, the city attorney, but that provision, our understanding is that change was really so that a council member could serve on other commissions or boards that were not compensated. So, for example, if you wanted to serve on MORPC or something else, that would not be an issue because some of these are, conflict of interest type things. So some of that language, the addition of other non-compensated public was my understanding in talking with Ray and with Shane Ewald, who was a prior city attorney that was on the commission, that was going to just clarify the ability to serve, since some of the additional commissions or volunteer activities sometimes question whether that is able to be part of it.
Well, another one would be, in the past, we had a person who ran for office and worked at the Board of Elections, and he had to leave the Board of Elections. So I'm just questioning. I don't want anybody to go and get plans to run for council, get this money, raise money, put things out, and then say, no, you can't do it because you have an employment within, you're going to get paid for something that's done in some kind of attorney thing. Mm-hmm. So, I'm saying I'm just questioning it because I don't want people to be upset with this afterwards, not knowing and having spent a whole lot of money or certain thing.
Yeah, and I understand that, and I think I know the prior council member, and which I think was more of his employer's issue rather than the city's issue. Yeah. But Ray has his hand up, and I'm sure he can better explain this.
I was going to call you, Ray, when I saw this one.
Yes, keep in mind there's two things here. One, the qualifications of council don't kick in until the person is sworn in, okay? And so they can run while they still hold another position such as this, but and they wouldn't have to relinquish that position just to run. But if they get elected, then they could not serve in both those capacities. The second part is it also says a position in which there's a conflict with council. So it's a two-pronged thing. It compensated and which could be in conflict with the office of a council member. So that's the second part.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I see
not
that.
Just anyone. It's only one that would be in conflict with the council member. Does that answer your questions? Well,
I guess so. Yeah. I just, I felt uncomfortable when I read that, and uncomfortable for people that are thinking to run for office. So
yeah,
if they
and as I'm reading it, it doesn't look like any of the part that is making you uncomfortable has been changed.
No.
The only part that's been changed added the word compensated.
Well, that's because if you're being compensated, you could probably, if you're not being compensated for it. Okay, I just want to make sure, and I appreciate the work you did, Sheila.
Yeah, thank you. You guys did a great job in like a short period of time. I know it's always a hurry up. Appreciate all your time and effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
No, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
Aren't we absolutely, we have to put this on exactly the way it is.
Correct.
We cannot say we're not going to do one. And not going to do this one.
In answer to your question,
But it's not because this is
2203 of the charter says council shall submit to the electors at the next regular election any such proposed amendments to this charter. And so, yes, how it's presented is how you have to submit it, and then it's up to the voters to decide if they want it.
And so these will be on regular or consent agenda. Can they be on a consent agenda the next meeting?
They could.
So, is everyone okay with this since we have to do it?
Yeah. At this point, it's a formality that we have to do it.
Right, exactly. All right, so all 7 resolutions will be on the consent agenda.
I believe the mayor had her hand up. I don't know.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I actually just wanted to offer a comment. Thank you, Ray. I just wanted to, while Ms. Vitale's on the line, to thank you and the members of the Charter Review Commission. I'm sure all the council members join me as well. Having served on the Charter Review Commission 5 years ago, I know the work that goes into that, and for you guys to have been meeting weekly for the last 2 months and even prior to that, to sort through all of the suggested changes that were made, both by council, by the administration, by the public, and narrow it down. I know that that's a yeoman's job. So thank you very much for your service, not only to you, but to all the members of the Charter Review Commission. We also had a member who started out on the commission and unfortunately had to withdraw due to some very serious health issues. And he's been in our thoughts and prayers as well, too. But just wanted to convey that. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, please thank everybody for their time.
All right. Any other comments?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Sheila.
Thank you very much. Nancy, can I ask something? Is anybody else having like a slowdown of things and not being able to quite understand what people
Only
are saying?
Karen.
So it's a mind
No,
that
it's glitchy over here, Karen.
you have it too?
I only
No,
see you
okay.
slowing down. I don't see anybody else.
Yeah, that's the same for me.
Okay. We'll try to hopefully those will go better.
I don't know what to do. It might be too many phones or something close by. Or
Well, and this is our last virtual meeting.
thank goodness there is a guy.
We will be in chambers. I meant to say that at the beginning. Okay. Next up. Item C from the Director of Public Service and Engineering.
Good evening, everyone. The first item I have for you this evening is a request to award the refuse collection contract. Brief recap, Gahanna is part of a consortium that's facilitated by SWACO with 10 other communities within our consortium. The goal of that consortium is to be a resource-conscious steward of not only taxpayer dollars, but also extending the life of the Franklin County landfill. So in an effort to increase competition for the bid, the consortium combined some communities together, and Gahanna was ultimately combined with Reynoldsburg. Following council's approval of permission to bid earlier this year, I believe it was in January, the consortium sought competitive bids for the contract. Haulers were asked to provide a status quo bid and were also allowed to submit an alternate bid. The bids were for a 3-year contract with 2 one-year optional extensions. The bids were open on January 10th with bids from Rumpke and Local Waste. Local Waste only bid on Gahanna and Reynoldsburg. In my report, you'll see a very brief breakdown of the pricing. Then I'll go into more detail next. So Rumpke's bid for status quo, which is, it is what we receive right now, is $22.31 per month per household. The optional years do increase in price after that. Now, Local Waste status quo bid for the first 3 years as well as the 2 optional years was $50 per household, which is basically a no bid bid. They had to bid this so that they could bid their alternate bid. So they bid it in such a fashion that we wouldn't accept the status quo because that's not what they're interested in providing. So the alternate bid for the first 3 years as well as the 2 optional years is $20.47 per month per household. So we have evaluated all the options, and we are recommending going with the local waste alternate bid, which does include several improvements and changes to the service. Specifically, local waste would be providing a 95-gallon trash cart to all the residents, which provide a much cleaner look on collection day. So you don't have all these mixed mask cans everywhere, bags. You don't have rodents crawling into the bags, taking trash down the street. And then the trash cart would be owned and maintained by local waste. One of the other changes is collection of all items, so that'd be yard waste, trash, and recycling, would occur for half the city on Monday, and then the other half of the city on Tuesday. So having all items collected together will allow residents to put everything on the curb for collection all in one day, and then collect all the cans the same day. Just do it once. It'll reduce confusion for our residents as well as new residents who have to try and figure out when to put out what. Also, splitting the city in half over 2 days will help ensure more reliable collection with fewer chances of delays. Lastly, local waste alternate bid is $1.84 cheaper per month than Rumpke's bid for the first 3 years. And will end up being $3.43 cheaper by the end of the extension years. So this equates to a savings of more than $200,000 per year and over $1 million over the life of the contract. So it's a pretty significant savings going with the alternate bid. So our department has been provided numerous recommendation letters regarding local waste from other communities, such as Upper Arlington, Grove City, Pataskala, Hilliard, Whitehall, and the list goes on. We've also spoken with representatives of several of these communities, as well as consortium leaders, who all have provided positive remarks about local waste service.
I don't hear anything. Bad network.
Can everyone else hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
So we understand that this is a big change. So upon bid acceptance and contract approval, we will work closely with local waste on the implementation plan, which would include communication outreach to residents regarding the changes in service. Local waste has completed many transitions like this, and they're very ready to work with our community and our team to make this a smooth transition. So based on all this information, we are respectfully requesting legislation to authorize the mayor to enter into contract with local waste.
Sorry, Michael. Michael, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So quick question, Grant. I understand the math behind it. It looks like somewhere over the life of the contract, the average household will save between $22 and maybe $41 annually, and we get a shiny new trash can out of it as well. Is there any risk? Well, the first question, I guess, is are we breaking from the consortium? It sounds like in your previous comments, there were 10 communities that are part of this process, but yet local waste only bid City of Gahanna as well as Reynoldsburg.
So we are still a part of the consortium. They have combined bids within the consortium to become more competitive. So I think 2 or 3 contracts ago, they used to bid the entire consortium, all communities, as one bid. And the consortium realized that this is hard to impossible for anyone to achieve that other than Rumpke. So that's why they split off other communities into separate bids within the consortium so that we could garnish more competition, such as local waste. So local waste likely would have never bid on this if it was one bid of all 10 communities under one contract. This way they can slowly work up and, take a bite out of it, per se.
Sure. So then the follow-up question, do you relinquish any leverage? I know in past discussions over compared to some of my colleagues on council, relatively short tenure here, one of the sticking points when these things come up is the collection day. And I know we've tried to really guard that Monday collection day for yard waste. do we relinquish any leverage in subsequent contracts, 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the road by making this change?
I don't think that we will. The challenge that we might face in future contracts if we try to change it all on one day, the entire city on one day, is the ability for a contractor to collect, 30,000 collections all in one day. So spreading out over 2 days is certainly doable and achievable for local waste. In talking to them, they don't have any other community that collects it with, yard waste on Monday or a day, and then trash and recycling on the other. They have spread out collections in all other communities.
Okay, thank you.
Jamie, do you have a question?
Yeah, just a couple things. I know we just got, as Mike said, we got new Bright Shanty cans a little while ago. What happens to those? One question.
Those recycling cans will stay. Those are owned by the city. Local waste will just be providing 95-gallon trash carts.
Okay. Are we limited to just the cart, that 95 gallon? I mean, if you got a busy week and you got an extra bag, can you set out a second can? Those kind of things.
That's a great question, and that was one of the big questions I had when they provide this bid. Is it unlimited collection? And it is. And I talked with them multiple times to confirm that if you do have additional items, they can be set out, next to your 95-gallon cart. It does not have to be in a cart. So you can still set out bags. You can still set out trash cans beyond the 95-gallon cart.
Okay. And the same type of thing with bulk pickup. We just call them if we got something bulk.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
When would this contract start?
It would start January 1st.
Okay. I'm sorry, Stephen, I missed you. You were right. You had your hand up. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I think Jamie probably helped clarify some of the questions, but just for clarity, it's not a 95-gallon trash bag to collect yard recycling and trash in all in one can, right? It's a 95-gallon trash bin. We still do the yard waste in bags, and we still use the blue thing for the recycling. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
No problem.
It's just much easier if we throw it all in one can, Stephen.
Yeah. That was my next question. Is like, how does that work?
Any other questions?
No, thank you.
I guess I do have one. Do people have to take the 95-gallon? I mean, if they have a small one, they never fill it up. Do they have to take the 95-gallon one?
So the standard is 95-gallon, but there is an opportunity for a smaller size if there's maybe medical conditions that would prevent them from pushing a larger cart out. So we'll certainly work with residents on getting them smaller carts if they need it.
Okay. Is it similar to the one we have now for recycling? Is that the same size?
It will be bigger. The one for recycling now is a 64-gallon or 65-gallon, so it will be bigger.
Okay, all right. That's pretty big.
Yes.
All right. I guess I was just thinking that a lot of people didn't like the idea of the 65-gallon one because it didn't fit in their garages. And now if we're saying you got to have a bigger one, and now we've got to have two of them, if they could just not have if they could not take the new one and still put out their small cans. That's what I was.
Yeah, we'll still be supplying the 95-gallon cart, and this is some of the logistics that we'll need to iron out within the next few months on how to manage that, because you're right, there are going to be some residents that just will push back and not want a 95 cart for their own reasons. So we'll have to work through that and find the best compromise.
Okay.
Real quick, just for reference, how big are the blue ones that we have? Are those 95 or there's 60 something?
They're 64, 65.
Okay.
Wow, 95 is huge.
That's big.
Will they take my old 95 that hadn't had a lid for a couple of years? Will they take that in the first day? They can have that one.
Oh, Karen, do you have a question?
Put your
Yeah,
95 in the 95.
There you go. I'll fold it out.
How long has this particular company been in existence?
So Local Waste, under the name Local Waste, started in 1999. However, the owner of Local Waste was a partner or a part of another company before they became Local Waste. Interesting enough, and I haven't fact-checked this, but I believe it, we actually had that company before we switched to Rumpke under this previous name. I don't remember what the name is. I talked to him about it a few weeks ago. The owner of Local Waste is very familiar with Gahanna, as he literally collected waste in Gahanna back in, I think, the 80s.
Okay, I'm trying to remember which one that was.
It's not around anymore. I can't quite think of it right now.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So then this is a ordinance to authorize you to enter a contract. Any objection to this being, so this will be just first reading at the next meeting. And anyone wanted to come back to a committee, or are we okay to put on consent, forward it to consent?
Hey, Nancy, this is Mike. I wonder if, since we're missing a couple of council members, if maybe we don't have it come back just to give them an opportunity to comment if there's anything that's...
Okay, sure. Okay, so we will have this on for first reading Monday and then bring it back to committee on the 12th. First meeting on Tuesday, I should say. Okay, thank you. Okay, next item.
So the next item is permission to award the recycling processing contract. So with the refuse hauler, they collect yard waste, trash, and recycling. Then they drop off the recycling at a recycling processing facility. And then the city then pays for the recycling contractor to process the recycling. So as previously noted, we do cooperatively bid this within our consortium as well. With the consortium's process, recycling processing is bid first because the prices are built into some of the refuse collection contracts. So recycling processing bids were opened on April 15th, and Rumpke was the only contractor who submitted a bid for this. The per ton tipping or processing fee does remain at $35 per ton for the entire length of the contract. The contract will still include a revenue sharing clause that allows the city to receive 50% of revenue realized beyond the processing expense, and then this is capped at $20 per ton. So we are respectfully requesting legislation to authorize the mayor to enter into contract with Rumpke for recycling processing.
Any questions?
No.
Okay. Well, then we will do the same thing with this. We'll have it on for first reading next week and then bring it back to committee the following week in case there are any comments. Okay, thank you for that, Grant. Okay, moving on. Next item, item D, item from the Department of Information Technology.
Yes, I will start us off, Councilwoman, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
This is a project really that we really identified over the past year. When I came into office, one of my top three priorities, or one of my three priorities, was to streamline our operations. Certainly look for, identify opportunities to do that, both internally and externally, so that we could maximize the way we are providing our services to residents. Over the last 18 months, one of the biggest opportunities that I've seen in this area is the way that residents communicate questions, problems, concerns to the city. You know, there's a pothole on my street that needs to be fixed. There's a tree limb down. There's a fence that's down that needs to be repaired. There's a street light that's been burned out. The problem is there is no one way to communicate those concerns. They come in multiple different avenues. They come by email, Facebook messages to the city, Facebook posts on multiple different Gahanna related Facebook pages. They come in, there's a website portal that they could go on. They come via phone calls to the individual departments, and a lot of times have to get rerouted. I know the council members receive a lot of phone calls from residents as well. The challenge is there's no centralized portal to capture these complaints and concerns and requests for service, so to speak, when they come in. And as a result, many times there's a lag in our lag time in our ability to actually respond to that, because ultimately all of those requests for service are going to be directed to somebody here at City Hall, whether it's the Public Service Department, the Parks and Recreation Department, maybe it's a PD issue, if it's a question of the way a car is parked on a street. And by the time it gets funneled, for example, from a council person, either to me or to a director, to somebody in their department, to the person who needs to handle it, a lot of times it can be days and sometimes weeks before we are able to address somebody's concern. And a lot of times that really negatively hampers our ability to respond effectively to the resident's concern. So what we are proposing and what this contract would be, we are proposing to implement kind of I'm going to call it a 3-1-1 system. There are many communities that already have this in place. Columbus and Dublin are two of them, but communities that are more akin to Gahanna would be Hilliard and Westerville. Are just some examples of communities that utilize a system like this. And what it would do is create one centralized portal for residents to go through to identify a request for service or an issue. If a family's out for a walk at night and they see the street lights burned out, they can take a picture of it, upload it if they want, and it goes right to the department that is responsible for making that repair. The service request effectively would function as an internal work order process. The work order would be tied to an individual managed asset. It would allow for better inventory control and management, so we can track how many light bulbs do we need and how many pieces of X material that do we need to reorder. It would also allow for better purchasing control, because the system would tie to our new finance system, so that our finance director actually could go in, track inventory, and issue a requisition order just based on the inventory asset control and management. It would also create some better operational awareness for us. So through this system, we can track how long it's taking our staff to make repairs and how efficient we're being in the way we're operating and how we're scheduling. It would help us to identify, are we having frequent calls in one area or one street? Is there a frequent problem that's continuing to happen? And it really would allow us to provide data and metrics back to our residents that really can track what we are doing for them and how we are servicing them. Once a resident would go in and log a request for service, the resident could then go in and see when it was received, how it was handled, who handled it, how long it took, and really follow that through. Right now, we don't have anything like that. We have Excel spreadsheets all over the city on various computers maintained by various individuals, and to try, and a lot of times those aren't even complete because they're busy out in the field and they can't log and track something. So it is difficult to track all of those things. It really would be easier internally. It would be easier for our residents, and it really would make our ability to respond to our residents much more efficient and make the city services much more accessible. So I'm going to actually turn this over now to Kevin Schultz. He has been spearheading this project for many months now, and he handled the whole RFQ process, etc. So Kevin, if you could walk through it, please, that would be great.
Yep. Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, so as the mayor said, back on March 1st, the IT department published an RFP on behalf of the service department and the Parks and Recreation Department, who are the two major stakeholders in this type of project. As the mayor indicated, though, we do have other smaller stakeholders, but not less important, but just lesser, probably stakeholders who have lesser interactions with a system like this. But like the mayor indicated, her office, council's office for that matter, for metrics and those types of reporting type things, but then also the finance department as the mayor detailed. So the RFP really was broken up into three main sections. So we had asset management, service request, and the citizen engagement portal, which the mayor spoke to, and then work orders. So when we talk about assets, from a service department standpoint, Grant just talked about a 95-gallon refuse container, right? That is an asset to the city. It's an item that a resident can call on and request a new one, maybe. So how does that request come in, get processed, and then ultimately a new waste receptacle get placed at that particular location? So that then ties into the service request. The resident generally makes a service request, which then gets converted into a work order, and the work ultimately performed. Work can be performed on any asset. An asset should be considered anything that the department does work on, whether it's a street light, a fire hydrant, a waste receptacle. I remember back at the budget time, we were surprised at how many flower beds and the amount of mulch we would need in order to, process that stuff. So even the flower bed is considered an asset because it's something that the city manages and does work on regularly. So after the RFP was inquired by 38 vendors, 7 of which formally proposed on the RFP. I've run many of these processes, throughout my career, and for 38 vendors to inquire for the RFP, to receive the RFP and review it, that number was very high. I felt. I don't know if it was a COVID thing or what it was, but a lot of folks inquired and read our RFP and chose maybe not to bid, but there was a lot of traction that it got. We reviewed the 7 formal proposals, and we shortlisted 3 of those vendors. The review committee selected Wolpert Incorporated, which does have a local presence here in Central Ohio and in Ohio in general, to implement a best management implementation of a CityWorks product. So Wolpert would do the implementation, and CityWorks would provide the software, if you would. Okay, so we would enter into an agreement with Wolpert to implement CityWorks. We would also be entering or signing a license agreement for the SaaS solution through CityWorks as well. With the at the completion of the scope of work, we'll have a fully integrated citizen engagement portal that the mayor spoke to. That comes complete with a mobile application. So, a fully customized to the city of Gahanna mobile application for submitting service requests will be available on iPad and Android and iOS operating systems. The project would also do a complete review of the GIS. Obviously, each of the assets that we talk about is very critical to know where it is on the ground. What attributes do we have about that particular asset that talk about when was it installed, when was the last time it was maintenanced, when was the last time a fire hydrant was painted, for example. So we would do a review of the GIS to ensure that it's working in conjunction with the asset management system. We'd also study other integration points. The mayor talked about the implementing or integrating with the finance package, but we'd be looking at integrating with other packages as well, like an automatic vehicle locator service, for example. The fleet system that service currently has to manage fleet vehicles. And then obviously Wolpert would also be providing the trainings and support services for Go Live. I think the mayor talked about many of these things, but at the completion of the project, we'll increase our operational awareness across all levels of the staff, whether it's the highest level of management or the even the field worker who would have a work order automatically delivered to him or her as they're standing on a street corner. It would identify resource gaps and constraints, right? Can we start a project tomorrow where the backhoe is needed, for example? Well, the backhoe is tied up on 4 other jobs right now, so that piece of equipment would be necessary. So maybe Grant's group or the Parks and Rec group could go out and rent a backhoe, for example, in order to fulfill that request. It would increase efficiencies between departments because obviously there's a lot of coordination between the service department and Parks and Rec. It streamlines communication with the mayor, which the mayor spoke to with the residents. And then it also provides key metrics to not just to the mayor and the administration, but also to you folks when you guys have an inquiry. The cost of this project, or the cost of the Woolpert project with the SAS agreement, is $275,892. We will be, or we are, requesting a supplemental appropriation from the Capital Improvement Fund in the amount of $200,000 to bring the total project cost to $300,000, and that allows for about roughly a $24,000 contingency fee for any cost overruns that or unforeseen items that we may incur, and then also to cover any equipment purchases that might be necessary in order to operate the system appropriately. And that would mainly be field equipment and technology assets that would be placed in vehicles for field crews to leverage the system, while they're out doing their work. So, with that, I can take any questions.
Any questions? I had one. As far as like when somebody would call in, can they do this or report this anonymously? Is there a way to do that, or are they identified by phone number and or email?
The system is fully configurable and would allow for anonymous submissions of for service requests. The other thing that it also does is certain service requests could be made public. For example, displayed on a map how many folks have requested a new recycling container. That's a little bit innocuous. But then other requests, for example, like the car parked illegally on the street, that one might be hidden to the public. And then more appropriately, who submitted that request is hidden to the public.
Okay, thanks. Michael?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So first off, let me just say that the concept of a public portal where you can do this stuff is, it has my support. The idea that someone could have a mobile app, and if they're walking on, say, Big Walnut Trail and there's a downed tree, they can just simply notify the service department that that the pathway is blocked, as opposed to alternate means. But another question I have is, apart from, I guess, sort of generic service requests, such as that example I just provided, will this complement, incorporate, or in some way replace the existing code enforcement system that we have? What's the nexus there between this system that's being proposed and our existing code enforcement?
Yeah, so currently, code enforcement, permitting code enforcement violations and those such things will still continue to be handled through llama. There is definitely, CityWorks does make a code enforcement package that would be an add-on to this particular project. As we released the RFP, we did actually do an amendment to the RFP that asked those questions as to which vendors also offered permitting and code enforcement software as well. We took that information, we got pricing on those particular components. What we felt probably most the best approach would be to implement asset management and work order parts and pieces, and then further investigate either the enhancements of llama and the integration of llama, and or up to the potential replacement of llama with a bolt onto this product here.
Okay, thank you for the information.
I have a question.
Yes, Karen.
After you have all your components and the things that need to be done to make this work, what would the and everything's purchased? You said about $300,000. After everything's purchased for that, what is the typical yearly amount used for that particular project?
Yeah, so yes, the maintenance cost in year two. So in the $275,000, your maintenance for year one, or licensing, if you would, is incorporated in that $275,000. Year two maintenance is just under $65,000, and year three maintenance is $79,500. which is on par with what we see in our finance package, for example. Basically, what this company does is they prorate their maintenance down. So licensing cost for year one was $35,500, and then it slowly goes up until they reach their market value, and then it stays pretty steady at about 3 to 5% per year increase after year three.
Kevin, I know that there's so much IT and everything is changing in such a fast motion. Will this be 5 years without having to do other things to it that will make it obviously more prosperous or something like that? Understand where I'm coming from?
Yeah,
usually
absolutely.
Yeah, within 4 years, that's old technician. Let's go out and get the the robots or something.
Yeah, no, and CityWorks is a major player in this particular space, and they are, they really lead the field. It's them and Tyler Technologies. Tyler was shortlisted; they did not make our cut. But no, this technology has been around for a while and will continue to be around, supported, implemented, and improved over time. This calls for a SaaS solution, so software as a service, and the way in which they maintain those types of packages, it is around to stay, and it's not something that we consider to be disposable, if you would.
Okay, thank you. I think it's important that we take care of having monies available when there is something that needs to be fixed. So, and not just say, oh, wait a minute, we never put any money aside for that. So I don't know, are we going to potentially have that in a yearly budget, that we would have certain monies placed there if necessary for upgrades or whatever it might be? Assuming so.
Yeah, maintenance cost and maintenance budgets are more important a lot of times than the actual implementation budget, because it makes little sense to you buy a car and never change the oil.
I did that once. My car didn't work after a while. I had no idea what I had done. I had never changed the oil. Sorry. No, I just want to make sure of that, because sometimes we forget that, and then all of a sudden we have a huge product that needs to be changed over. So thank you. This sounds like it's something very, very good, and we can put it on our phone and all those things and make it easy. Thank you for coming up with that, Kevin. Mayor.
The thing I like about it is, I'm sorry, Councilman, go ahead.
Sorry, I'll be quick here, hopefully. So with regard to the data, there was some comment about it'll allow for tracking and trend analysis and things like that. And then I think the mayor had mentioned, maybe colloquially, there's a lot of spreadsheets flying around City Hall. If down the road there's ever a decision to, I guess, switch vendors, will the city own this data, or does the data belong with the provider? I guess I would hate to see us use this for 5 years or 10 years, make a change, and then lose access to that information that would serve us on a go-forward basis for future trend analysis in the out years.
Yeah. No, we own the data, they own the software. So they basically own the database and the schema behind it, but yet we own the ones and twos that reside in the database.
All right. Thanks, Ken.
Okay. Any other questions? So this will be on, well, you're asking for waiver of second reading, an emergency?
No emergency, just waiver of second reading. The vendor felt like if we got started in early September, that they could lock in their resources, basically, which is the only reason why we're asking for waiver. And that's, I even think without the waiver, I think that we can meet that early September schedule.
Well, I didn't see the emergency here, but I thought it was in your report. It said emergency. Maybe
Waiver, just waiver.
Yeah, in the paragraph it says emergency and waiver, but that's a typo. It should just say waiver.
Okay, I thought I read that somewhere, but then I only saw the waiver here, and I just want to make sure that that was what you needed. So is everyone okay with that? Or have objection to the waiver of second reading?
No, I think that's fine. I just have another question. Are there any cities around here that have this particular information, or
there's a lot of different vendors who do this particular work, but CityWorks in particular is implemented in Dublin and in Westerville.
Oh, yes, okay.
Upper Arlington. There's quite a few folks who have and operate with CityWorks.
Yeah.
Okay,
Hilliard
great.
has- and Hilliard has it as well.
Okay. All right. So this will be on. Why don't we put this on the regular agenda in case the other council members have a question or a concern about this? So we'll just put this on the regular agenda for Monday with waiver of second reading. Okay. All right. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to items from the Director of Finance.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Just have a couple things for you. So the first one has to do with previous legislation that I brought forward. If you remember back in March, I brought forward the results of a Treasury audit that spanned over 5 years, 2015 to 2019. So when we ran the results through, we ran them through without consideration on my part that there might be some activity in the pipeline. So while I was bringing the legislation forward, public safety had made some or obligated some funds. So it kind of changed the type of action that I need. Not necessarily action, but just the dollar amounts and where the funds are coming from and where they're going. And so you'll see where I kind of gave a side-by-side comparison of the original legislation that I needed, and then what I need it to be in order to correctly account for the activity that occurred in 2021, so we can get those balances in line with what the audit results were and also with the reporting out to the Department of Justice.
Okay. Any questions about this? No questions. All right. I guess we will put this first reading for next Tuesday.
Great.
And then we'll bring it back to committee since there are two people not here. So, all right, next.
Next one is the tax budget for 2022. This allows the county budget commission to make a determination that we need all of the millage that we have. We only have inside millage, so nothing voted. We obviously need all that millage. What this will do is it'll allow them to determine that, and then they will send back to us their certification of the property tax levies and amounts. We'll adopt those in October. This is just pulled from the 5-year forecast that was done with the 2021 budget. We'll firm that up as we go through the fall budget process. So bring forward, an updated forecast with the request for 2022 appropriations. So just a resolution to approve the tax budget and allow me to file it with the county by July 20th so they could set their rates and amounts.
Any questions about this? Nope. Okay, so resolution 0025. This is something we do every year, right, Joanne? The same time.
Oh, yeah.
Why don't we put this on the consent agenda? And if the other two want it not on the consent agenda, they can ask for it to be removed, because I think this is pretty boilerplate.
Yeah.
So 0025 2021 will be on the consent agenda. Okay. Next.
The next thing I have is, as you may recall, we had talked about the need to upgrade our current timekeeping and scheduling systems with our vendor. I signed the quote that immediately resulted in an invoice coming, and I did not have the purchase order open. So this is a request for then and now purchase order. We had the funds available. They're already appropriated. They were appropriate at the time I signed the quote and available, and they're appropriated and available now. So this is just a resolution to allow for then and now purchase.
Okay, any questions? Okay, so we'll do this same thing. Resolution 0026 will be on the consent agenda for Tuesday evening. Okay.
Great. Last item I have for you is an appropriation transfer. So during the 2021 budget process, we determined that the Director of Economic Development would not be filled as we were leading into the budget, but we knew we still needed to have economic services. So we opted to use a contractor until such time that we could hire Director of Economic Development, and then also so they could set their staffing for the department. So this is just an appropriation transfer now that we have an Economic Development Director, and he's determined what his staffing needs are to move that out of contract services and put it back into the associated salaries and benefits lines.
Okay. Any questions, comments?
No.
All right, let's do the same with this. Resolution 0027-2021 will be on the consent agenda.
And then the last thing, I just wanted to give everybody a little update on the ARP funds. I know that's kind of been in the back of everybody's mind and what's kind of going on and when we're going to get it and how that's going to work. So I've been sitting through a lot of OBM webinars, looking at the guidance. So the state has done their part to request the dollars. It is there, but then they have to take a couple steps. Part of it is appropriating those dollars. They could send it out. Another part is a registration process for the non-entitled units of government, which we are. So that allows them to meet certain requirements, making sure that we're not excluded or disqualified under the federal requirements, making sure they capture our DUNS numbers, obtaining budget information, because if you recall, or if you've looked at any of the guidance, they cannot give us more than 75% of our operating budget. And those will come in two tranches. So the first tranche just can't exceed 75%. If it does, then that'll come with the second one, exactly 1 year after they distribute the first amount to us. And then we have to sign off on a couple different award terms and conditions, assurance of compliance. So when will we get it? Still not sure. This is the short answer. The registration, they can't set that up until the budget bill is passed. So Senate Bill 111 is out there. They have already sent the guidance associated with registration. You just can't get to it yet. The other thing that is in that bill is they are including townships as part of the non-entitled units of government that previously they were not included. So any original estimates that we may have gathered as far as what we were expecting to get as the city of Gahanna will be reduced. I'm not sure how much that reduction will be because the calculation for all non-entitled units of government is the same. So it's basically going to include those populations of those townships. So it'll be whoever, in our case, the city of Gahanna, what our population is, divided by the population of all of the non-entitled units of government. So we're going to see a reduction to any of those original estimates. They do not have any preliminaries out there, but I think it's so close to distributing that they're probably not going to send out any preliminary estimates, to be honest with you. Through these webinars, the state does have multiple 30-day extensions that they can request. The first 30-day extension doesn't really require much documentation on their point. They just, on their part, they just have to say it's an administrative burden and it's granted. They have not given any indication of taking any of those extensions, but my guess is they're going to take that first 30-day just because they have to get this registration program up and running and figure out how they're going to improve these thousands of non-entitled units of governments through those registration processes. So I'm thinking that sometime September, possibly October, is when I'm expecting that first 50% to be distributed to us. And then again, we'll get that 1 year later. As far as the uses, we have until December 31st of 2024 to obligate these dollars. And then we have until December 31st of 2026 to expend it. So that long timeline was provided because they really, really want us to think and be intentional on how we're using it and prove out how it's spurring economic development, still dealing with the aftermath of the pandemic. And with that, we're going to have to report directly to Treasury, and we're going to have to provide some of that programmatic information and some of those measurements. If we say that we're doing X project because it's going to stimulate the number of available, the hiring field or the labor force. We have to have numbers behind that. We served X number of individuals. They were offered, X number of positions. So there's going to be a lot more tracking involved with this, and it falls under a lot more of the federal guidelines. So there's going to have to be some upfront work on our part too. Once we determine kind of what that looks like, how do we capture that information with the software that we have, which we recently moved over to Munis, back in 2019, and it has wonderful reporting capabilities and the ability to set up a lot of projects and stuff. So, but it's some upfront work that's going to have to occur. We also are going to have to go back through all of our procurement policies and procedures, because the federal procurement is much different than local procurement. And the first round of coronavirus relief funds did not fall under those procurement requirements. This particular round of funding does fall under those procurement requirements. So we're going to have to go through our policies, procedures, make sure they're in line with the uniform guidance under the Single Audit Act, before we can start talking about, how we're going to use some of these dollars. The other part is the loss in revenue that was allowed with this. I did the preliminary calculation, but then I had to send a question to U.S. Treasury. So I calculated the loss based on the guidance that they put forth, which basically said use the greater of a 4.1% growth factor or the 3-year average. Well, we had an income tax increase in there. So our 3-year growth is like 10%, which is greater than the 4.1. But I'm being cautious because it's, I just don't want to make a determination without some guidance from them that that's okay, that we had a tax increase in there, we can still use the greater number. So I ran it both ways, and the loss in revenue will either be 3.5 million or 1 million. And the caveat behind those funds is it has to be for general government services. So you can't put it into stabilization funds, you can't use it for emergency reserves. It has to be used for general government operations. And we also have to be careful when we're planning that out, because this money is not going to last forever. So we just want to be cautious with how we're kind of using that for those general operational services. So with that, I'll go ahead and take any questions anybody might have.
Michael?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Joanne, I appreciate all of that information. It seems like it's quite a bit going on. I'm wondering if you might check my understanding.
Well, you've got it back there, Michael.
Hang on a second to see if I can correct that. Is that any better?
Yes.
Okay. I'm wondering if you can, Joanne, check my understanding here. So the federal government authorized the dispersal of some amount of money because we are categorized, meaning we, the city of Gahanna, are categorized as a non-entitled entity. It gets filtered through the state instead of hitting us directly. So when in your comments, when you were talking about they are working on dispersing it, they is the state.
Correct.
Okay. And then what's currently occurring now is the money has been targeted to the population that exists here, but I guess there's now been some reconsideration about the entities, the overlapping entities that serve that population. Of course, I'm referring to Mifflin Township and Gahanna, for all intents and purposes, serving 90% of the same population. So whatever number was supposed to serve that population and come to the city of Gahanna is now being adjusted. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And then I guess the last question I have for you, what's really the drop dead date? You've mentioned, and even in prior conversations, you mentioned, they had the series of extensions that they could ask for or request. When do they have to send the first round of dollars?
If they opt to use that first 30-day, which is pretty much, they just have to say that they need more time, 60 days from the time that they received it. Unfortunately, through all of the webinars, they haven't really said what was that date that they received it. They just said that they have received it, and they're trying to set up this registration process. So by guidelines, either 30 days from the date that it hit their coffers or 60 days if they take that first extension. But again, they haven't informed anybody what was that date that they actually received it. So
the longest extension that they can request is 60 days?
No, they have up to 120 days of extensions, but each one gets harder and harder for them to get authority to do it. Okay. So with the next one, they at least have to show that they've started. So the first 30-day one, not much required. If they then go for that next 30-day one, they have to justify and submit a plan. That next 30-day one, they at least have to show that they've started sending out the money and what the plan is for the remainder that have not received it yet. And then that final one should just be kind of the low-hanging fruit, those non-entitled units of government that never registered or never reached out to apply for the money, and what does the state do with it at that point in time. So those are kind of goes from kind of easy and harder and harder. But at least after that first 30-day extension, they at least have to start distributing to somebody. And if not, have a very detailed plan in response as to why they didn't and how they're going to accomplish it.
So even if we don't necessarily know the specific date, do we know like the month when the state received the funds? I mean, did they get it?
It was June, sometime in June.
Okay, so all right. So we can say by what, October? That'll be out. Okay.
Yeah, I'm banking on mid-September, early October.
Okay. I mean, does that allow enough time to coordinate with next year's budget?
Yes, that is the goal. And we've already had a lot of preliminary discussion. The other problem is they keep on adjusting their FAQs and opening up the funding for more. So I shared with the mayor that there was a new FAQ that we probably need to put in front of senior leadership, because they've added more things that it could be used for. So all those things that we had preliminarily discussed, well, we might want to change it now based on the new FAQs that were issued. They also don't have final rules yet. They're still in the interim stage. They're taking comment on those to July 16th. So there could even be some changes from the rules that we're looking at now to what those final rules might be that'll come out shortly after the comment ends on July 16th.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, again, ultimately, I know it's a series of questions, but what I was fundamentally driving at is, will the monies be available, or will we know what they are in time for next year's budget, consistent with what you were talking about, which I believe is the spirit of the law, that this is well thought out and so forth, as opposed to the alternative being a series of supplementals that may or may not be as cohesive as the budget would be. So, okay, thank you for the information.
Yeah, much different than the first round of funding, which was hurry up, quick, spend it. This is a much more, be intentional on what you're doing, make sure you're doing the right thing, make sure you're actually doing things to boost the economy and serving those that we found were very underprivileged through this process with the first round of dollars, and how the pandemic affected different demographics.
Understood. Thank you again.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Do you anticipate that council will have to enact any legislation to accept this money? I mean, it's special requirements that we would have to meet?
No, the only thing will be to set up a new fund. So that'll be the only legislation that'll come forward. And I'll probably bring that forward closer to when we're going to receive the dollars. So that way I can let everybody know kind of, here's the amount that we should be receiving, and authorization to go ahead and set up that special fund to account for it.
Okay. Karen, did you have a question?
What's a guesstimate on how much we'll get? No guesstimate?
They're not putting anything out there. The original estimate was right around 7 million, but that was before they included townships. So now that townships are included in the mix, they haven't sent anything out to say what the population of those townships are. I do want to let everybody know that, as you may know, as an Ohio resident, we are pretty township heavy. There's about 1,300.
There's nothing wrong with that township stuff.
Yeah, there's like 1,305 townships, and their populations all range from a couple hundred, to, maybe a couple hundred, not a couple 100,000, but, 10, 20,000. The other problem is they're not quite sure if they have enough information to really capture what that township population is. So that's going to be another struggle that they're going to have as they're trying to do this. As you know, the Census Bureau kind of captures by metropolitan area, and then municipality, they don't really go down to the township level. So it's really kind of, I don't know. I wouldn't even want to try to guess at what that might mean for our allocation.
Joanne, did you see the OML bulletin that came out late Friday night? There was one where they had a link to initial projections, but to your point, it's still rough. But based on what they're initially suggesting, is it's close to 50% of what we were going to receive. I mean, but it's still a question mark because the question also is, in addition to all the things Joanne just pointed out, is there is still an opportunity, or the question has been raised certainly by Ohio Municipal League to encourage municipalities to contact our legislators to say that if you are going to take the money from the cities to distribute to townships, then the state should make municipalities that have been looking to rely upon that money at least make us whole, because the state has received money as well. So that is all still being discussed at the State House before they actually agree on what that's going to look like. So to Joanne's point, it's very difficult to still estimate that.
Well, the townships have a very powerful lobby in the state.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? So what do we do? We have, that's just a discussion. So what? So we'll be discussing this for a while. Thank you, Joey.
Unless it's done in 30 days.
Yeah.
Done.
Okay. All right. All right. Any other questions? And we'll move on. Next, items for the Director of Economic Development.
Code enforcement.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for including this in the agenda for the Committee of the Whole this evening. With me this evening, I have Mr. Aaron Underhill representing the developer, Larry Canini and the Casto Group. As a refresher on this project, this was an item that was brought before the committee and council back earlier this year. I believe the council took formal action on this issue related to the developers agreement, related to what is being called the Buckles property, the Crescent Development Project. It's got a couple different iterations over the years. This is related to specifically the TIF, the Tax Increment Financing Arrangement that was identified within the developers agreement. This is a non-school TIF, so the school district does not have any exposure in this arrangement. On, I believe, Exhibit B of the arrangement also identifies what are some of the key public infrastructure eligibility items that are related to this TIF arrangement for property improvements related to the development there at the Crescent, at Tech Center Drive, Buckles, etc. Wanted to bring this to your attention. We did have a issue as part of the developers agreement that had a requirement to have this put forward to the council for approval prior to, I think, August 15th, and that was related to property transfer tied to the park space that was dedicated as part of this project as well. Based upon the current timing of this, I don't anticipate that being of an issue, moving this project forward at the pace. That's why there was no inclusion of emergency clause. But I welcome any comments or feedback. And also, as I mentioned, Mr. Underhill's here from the developer, if you have any questions related to any of the language as well. So to that, I'm going to be quiet and turn it to you.
Any questions?
No.
I don't have any questions, really.
That's the kind of meeting I like to have, Council. This is my first formal issue before the council, and if there's no questions, I feel really good about the choices I have made.
Thumbs up.
Thank you, Council.
Well, let's see, I'll go back. Well, if there's no questions, I guess we'll, so are we okay to have first reading and then bring it back to, we'll bring it back to committee in case the other two have any questions. So we'll have the ordinance 0045 on for first reading and then come back to committee the following week.
I appreciate it. And thank you, Mr. Underhill. I'm going to go on record and just say thank you for your time this evening. You've learned a lot about city business this evening. He's been on, I think, since about 7:30 or so. So I really appreciate your inclusion as well as your billable that you're sending to Larry at this point. So
that's the greatest part, really. I mean, it all pays the same, right?
That's not our bill. It's not our bill.
Thanks, you, everybody.
Thanks, Mr. Underhill. All right. Well, okay, next, discussion from the Director of Planning.
Yep. And as usual, I will kick this off as well. Gee, Nate, I haven't heard a billable hour joke in a really long time, so thank you. So that, just to kind of refresh council's recollection, back on February 22nd, there was a discussion about code enforcement. It was, council had put that on your agenda, and I think we had a really robust discussion. And just to kind of put everybody back in time at that point, February 22nd, we had just officially created the new Department of Planning at the beginning of the year. We were a few weeks removed from having the retirement of a very long-term city employee who had been serving as the public planning and zoning administrator. We were about to begin the process of hiring a third full-time code enforcement officer. We're just in the process of bringing back the part-time code enforcement officer. And we were beginning to work on really identifying what that new job description would be for the planning and zoning administrator, given its new place under the Department of Planning, to make sure that the job functions of that position aligned with the Director of Planning and what his vision for that role would be. That night, I think, when you go back and you watch the video from council discussion that night, it was very clear that we all have the same objectives for code enforcement. Essentially, we want consistency in enforcement. We want timeliness, better reaction time, and making sure that we are conducting timely follow-up. And we really want clarity within the code provisions that we are seeking to enforce so that our citizens understand what it is they are responsible for complying with. Those three things really were very loud and clear back when we met on February 22nd. Since that time, we have been, Michael has been doing, Director Blackford has been doing a great job of really kind of peeling that onion of code enforcement apart to understand how it operates, implementing changes to make it operate a little bit more efficiently. And I would say the code enforcement division, as with every division and every department in the city, you know, this is not a, gee, by July 15th, we're going to be done. This is I just want to make sure I'm clear that this is an ongoing evolution for every single division and department here. Every day we come to work and we think about, okay, what are we going to do today differently than the way we did it yesterday that will be better going forward? So the minute you stop looking at how you're operating and how you make your operations better, timeliness, efficiency, cost efficiency, then you stop growing as an organization and you stop responding to what's happening outside of the city hall walls. So that is a daily evaluation that we are doing. So we're making changes, but we're constantly going to continue to make changes with this as we encounter an issue, and maybe we'll set a process now that, you know, 3 months from now or a year from now, we decide there's a different way of doing that. But Michael is going to present tonight to you just an update on code enforcement, a lot of the things that have been done over the past 3 months, where we are today, which, sorry, Michael, I'm going to take your thunder, but today happens to be the first day of our brand new planning and zoning administrator. So we thought, what a great way to welcome him to the city of Gahanna, but to have a code enforcement discussion at city council. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Director Blackford and allow him to talk about code enforcement.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Jadwin. The mayor said it much more succinctly than I will, so be prepared to hear some of that information again. So first off, like the mayor kind of touched on, why are we here giving you a code enforcement update tonight? We had received numerous concerns from the public late 2020, early 2021. Lots of emails questioning sort of policies and procedures, numerous records requests. There were concerns about technology, specifically items disappearing from our online database, as was touched on earlier in this meeting. Code enforcement, there is a public portal on our website that folks can enter in complaints anonymously or with their contact information, and some of those things were disappearing. There was also concerns about fees and how we're assessing fees related to work without a permit. Because of all those questions and concerns, very valid questions and concerns, we had a discussion February 22nd with council. Talked a little bit, like the mayor said, we're department in transition, restructuring due to, again, transferring a division from one department to another, retirement of staff. We're evaluating some of those internal policies, and we're trying to, again, replace some of those staff members. So we asked for a bit of time to come back and give you an update. We said we'd be back in June. So here we are. As a reminder, and we did kind of talk about this at our February 22nd discussion, just what is the purpose of code enforcement? Again, enhance the overall appearance of the community, protect property values, protect the health, safety of the residents in the community. And really what we're all striving for is that fair, consistent, predictable enforcement. Some misconceptions about code enforcement. So we just talked very high level, very briefly, what code enforcement is, what code enforcement isn't. They are not the group that assesses penalties for work without a permit. That's sort of a common sort of question that's not up to code enforcement. Most permits, work without permits, those are usually building permits. And the building code that we have, Chapter 13, does address this issue. And it does say that if you conduct work without a permit, that we have to double your fees. So that's what we are doing. Full disclosure, historically, that's not always what has been done. That has been sort of previous administration's approach was a little bit different, but it is a code requirement. We are required to do that, and that's what we're doing. There are no double fees for other types of permits, so zoning permits or right-of-way permits or whatever other types of permits the city has. There are no double fees. Again, it's only in building permits. Another common misconception is code enforcement forcing people to comply with code. We can't really do that. What we do is eventually we ask you to comply. If you don't comply, we issue a citation. You go down to mayor's court. It's up to the magistrate. There might be a small fine. It's relatively minor. If you choose not to comply with whatever you've been cited for, the process repeats again. So again, code enforcement really can't make people comply. If they choose not to, there's fines associated with non-compliance. Another misconception, code enforcement is exterior only. They do not go into homes. They do not have the legal right to go in someone's home, much like the police don't. We don't go on to property other than on sidewalks, and we can go up to your door without somebody's permission. So what code enforcement can do on someone's piece of property is very limited. One thing, again, misconception is code enforcement's not always the subject matter expert. So they're not always the authority on compliance and non-compliance. They rely on the subject matter experts within the city and outside of the city. So there's a lot of internal communication between the planning department and code enforcement or zoning or building. We had a nice discussion this afternoon on a certain issue with 5 different folks. And so again, we're always talking amongst ourselves. And again, it's not just city folks, it's our outside organizations as well, the health department, animal control as well. So lots of various folks we have to, in code enforcement, discuss it with. And again, we're relying on those subject matter experts to determine, if there is a violation or not. What is maybe a suitable time frame associated with that due to the complexity. A couple examples of those. We've been working a lot this year's calendar year with drainage related complaints that involves multiple different departments within the city. Permitting, again, work without a permit. Real complicated one is when there's a use without approval to do that use. So again, very wide ranging. A lot of people have to get involved to determine if there's a violation and what that corrective action is that they need to take. Another sort of misconception is that it's all zoning related. It's actually, I think if you look at the amount of complaints and what those sort of top 10 complaints are, I believe like 7 of those 10 are non-zoning related. They enforce the IPMC, which is the International Property Maintenance Code, Building Code, Public Service and Engineering Codes, all sorts of different codes. So again, it's much more than just zoning, hence why there's a lot of interaction with the various departments within the city. Some of those changes that have been ongoing since February, and maybe a little bit before that, again, code enforcement has been shifted from public service and engineering to planning. A lot of that has to do with the work that planning does and zoning does and building does and the interactions with code enforcement. That makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of symmetries in those work functions. So it made sense to kind of shift that to new division there, new department. Again, as the mayor touched on, we had a long-term supervisor, 20 plus years, who retired at the end of January. We just so happened to have that new supervisor started today, so welcome, Zach. We also hired, it just so happened that our part-time officer started February 22nd. Was brought back from furlough the last time we had a discussion on this, and I swear that is a coincidence. We also had a full-time officer start in the beginning of May. So in January of 2021, code enforcement, the end of January, consisted all of 2 people. Again, we had a supervisor retire, we had a person furloughed, and we were advertising for a position. So today we have 3.5 code enforcement officers, 3 full-time, 1 part-time, and we have a supervisor. So there's been a lot of restructuring as far as getting positions filled. One thing that the mayor and I have been looking at and will continue to look at and evaluate, along with everything, but one of those certainly that has a lot of our attention is our standard operating procedures. I believe the last time those were modified were in 2018. And when you start restructuring and that, we really need to look at what was in place to see if that's still appropriate. And what we're trying to achieve with our standard operating procedures is consistency, timeliness, predictability. I think that's what everyone sort of wants to see from most things in life. Certainly code enforcement should be one of those. We've established timelines in our standard operating procedures. You need supervisor approval to deviate from that. One of the concerns we heard was the appearance that maybe code enforcement officers had too much discretion as to compliance, what those timelines should be in that. In order to address that, we still allow for some deviations, but it does require supervisor approval. What we really want to focus on, hopefully in second half of 2021, now that we're fully staffed, is proactive enforcement, focusing on those things that sort of rise to the top of the importance, which life safety issues. If there are those, that obviously those are going to get our full attention. Work without a permit is very important for us to get, because there's a small window of when those activities are taking place. We need to kind of capture that when it's ongoing. Otherwise, it's very difficult to kind of prove that there was work without a permit, because again, we're very limited in what we can do as far as going on property. And we're always focused on sort of the repeat and egregious offenders. As Councilman Schnetzer said at our last discussion on this, quoting the immortal words of George Costanza, we live in a society, so we need to make sure that people, sometimes they might forget that a little bit, and they just need some gentle nudging. And so, again, we focus on those individuals. Some more changes that are ongoing that affects code enforcement. There is the massive zoning code rewrite. We're taking a document that was written, when the moon landing occurred and sort of updating it. That'll certainly help having policies that we all, avoid sort of duplicate policies and policies that aren't really maybe the way the world works anymore. But it's not just zoning code, again, as I was talking about. It's more than just zoning code that code enforcement enforces. So we're always looking at various policies throughout the various codes that the city has. One of those things that we're looking at right now is the effectiveness of some rules and policies related to drainage. So again, that's we're always looking at everything, always looking to improve to make sure the rules we have are appropriate. Another major change back, I think it was in October or November of last year, the city adopted some nuisance code. And what the nuisance code is, it's really for those egregious offenders who just refuse to comply. So it's sort of kicking up code enforcement and what code enforcement can do. Again, it's mayor's court. I forget what type of misdemeanor. It's not much, my understanding. And so this is our strongest tool for compliance. We can actually condemn property. People can be convicted of a first-degree misdemeanor. And so it's a much stronger tool to get folks to comply. This is a new program. It's in place. Haven't really utilized it quite yet, but you never know what the future is going to hold. To address those technology concerns that we heard about, certainly it's not ideal, obviously, if information's disappearing from our databases. The good news is every time we've been made aware, the city's been made aware of that external interface of information disappearing. We've been able to get with our software provider, talked about earlier. Davenport Group provides us the Llama software. They've been able to correct those issues once the public has made us aware. So we are getting those technology issues corrected. One thing the department, including myself, desperately need is some training on the software. I'm happy to say we do have a training scheduled for July 26th. We've had the software in place for about 5 years now, and this will be our first software training since that initial implementation. There's been some changeover in staff, as we talked about. So we really need that. That'll certainly help us be proactive on some of those technology issues, be better prepared to handle those should any challenges come up in the future. And the great news is that's part of our annual contract. That's at no additional cost. So we'll be having this year after year. Again, some of those goals of all these changes we're making, what we're trying to accomplish. Again, we want fair and consistent enforcement. We're having weekly meetings to review the status of those code enforcement cases to make sure nothing kind of gets forgotten about. Here in a moment, I'll show you some of the volume that code enforcement's experiencing. And without weekly meetings and touch bases, it would be easy to kind of forget about the old and only focus on the new. So we try our best to avoid that. We do have regular communication with subject matter experts. I can attest to an hour or two that was spent this afternoon talking with some folks. And it was actually, the slide was already written, but we had to determine if a violation existed, and that required a couple of folks going out to do a site visit. We also have to have communication with what the progress is. Sometimes it's folks need to submit for a permit. So code enforcement, we're always touching base with permitting folks to see the status of what's going on. We have increased communication with our building division to accurately assess those fees. That was one of those big issues that was pointed out to us. We were incorrectly not assessing oftentimes double the permit fee. We're doing that to make sure that they're aware that there was work without a permit. So we're capturing those fees appropriately. Timelines for follow-up. So essentially how code enforcement typically works for most violations, but not all, you get a letter sent to you saying you have a violation, you have a certain amount of time to fix that violation. Code enforcement goes out to the property, does a check. If you don't comply, we issue a final warning. Hey, you've got 5 more days or whatever it may be. Then if you don't comply, you get a citation. Again, we're trying to have standard ways of handling that. And so there's not things that are hanging out with no progress from several years ago or whatever may have happened occasionally in the past. To deviate from those established timelines, will require supervisor approval, and we need some sort of proof. I've heard all sorts of very interesting reasons why folks can't comply with our rules and regulations. Some of it's extremely understandable. We just need some level of proof. Otherwise, it'll be extremely difficult to get folks to comply because it seems like everyone has a story as to why they aren't complying. Finally, final slide, just want to kind of go over some of the caseload for code enforcement, and this is through June 24th, almost the halfway point of the year, but not quite. If we look at 2019 and 2020, compared to 2021, you'll see that the percentage of proactive, which would be code enforcement initiated the case, compared to reactive, which would be, from our public inquiring about, something, the percentages between each year is relatively the same. Again, in 2019 and 2020, we had 2 full-time officers. Right now, we have 3.5. Even with almost doubling our staff here, we're at almost the same percentage of proactive and reactive. And you can see the big difference is the amount of cases in 2021. 35% increase over 2019. 2019 was a very normal year. No COVID. Last year with COVID, code enforcement wasn't out in the field for some of that time. The number of cases was less than in years past. So a significant increase in 2021 over the last couple of years. Again, just a very brief and obviously very brief and very concise update here. Happy for any questions. No action. We had just talked about coming back and giving you an update. Thank you all very much.
Any questions?
Oh.
I had one. Do you think the increase in cases is just due to because we have more code enforcement officers?
If our percentage of proactive was increased, I would say yes. But since the percentage of proactive cases is about the same as in years past, I think we've seen their proactive offset by the public being increased compared to last year. So I don't know if last year, maybe because of COVID, more folks weren't out and about, and so they weren't seeing and reporting some of those violations. So maybe we had a little bit of accumulation of some of that activity. So not yet. I would anticipate maybe if we were to look at the second half of 2021 or look at this point in time, next year, that 2022, there would be a higher percentage of proactive due to those increased officers.
Okay, that makes sense. Any other questions?
Ma'am.
Thank you for the update.
My pleasure. Thank you all very much.
All right. Next, we have recommendation from Planning Commission.
Yes. If you thought the last item was exciting, you haven't seen anything until you get a PowerPoint from me on code changes. So this one's a little bit more brief. What we're requesting is to amend one section of our zoning code. It's the Community Commercial Zone District. And what we're requesting to do is prohibit certain auto-related uses. Those specific uses, hopefully you all had redline in your packet of information, is new and used automobile dealers, boat dealers, RV dealers, auto repair, which try to list that out a little bit, so auto repair, the way the zoning code is written, would include some minor types of things like your tire shops, your paint shops, transmission, auto services such as car wash, oil change, and towing. What's not on this particular list is one particular auto-related use is gas stations. Gas stations are allowed in community commercial by conditional use, and that would be still be that way if this code change is approved. So the way community commercial is written, all these uses I've listed out are what's called conditional uses, which means that they're not allowed by right. You have to request a conditional use, which Planning Commission can evaluate and approve or deny based off of 3 or 4 different factors. So if this change is approved, these uses would go from a conditional use to just not being allowed within the community commercial zone district. So why are we requesting these changes? Quite honestly, the city has very few properties left to be developed. Our land use plan has some really interesting and really useful data about how our city is being used from an actual land use standpoint. And about 10% of the city has vacant land, but that's as of like 2019. But we've developed a few of those large parcels recently. One of those large parcels that are listed as vacant is, as Nathan had talked about earlier, is the Crescent, the Buckles Tract. That's obviously seen a couple developments over the last couple of years. And 2 or 3 of those parcels are owned by Columbus Academy as part of their campus. If you subtract those properties that have been developed or are part of Columbus Academy, really there's probably less than 4% of the city that's really vacant. So very few properties left to be developed. We have to be very strategic how we develop those. And interesting enough, in my opinion, the city, 7% of the city is used for commercial or office purposes. So again, we have very little commercial or office land, which again puts a premium on making sure that those properties are utilized to their highest and best use. One thing I found interesting when working for the city of 12.5 square miles is that we have 14 different commercial zone districts. That seems like a lot. I would forecast our zoning code rewrite is going to condense the number of those zone districts. Typically, zone districts, whether it's commercial or residential, but certainly in commercial, there's some sort of progression in the uses. There's some sort of difference between, zoning category X, Y, and Z. In my opinion, our zoning categories, they all allow for very similar uses, similar designs, similar setbacks. There's very little difference. That's sort of unusual. Certainly in the zoning district we're talking about, community commercial, usually the types of uses that are allowed are heavily restricted. A lot of jurisdictions will not allow for automotive related uses within their community commercial zoning. It would be in what some places call like a high intensity commercial or perhaps in an industrial area. So again, we're trying to be strategic with what we're allowing where. Our land use plan did make recommendations on uses within various areas of the city. And I'll here momentarily show you a couple of maps of the areas we're talking about where this would be affected. And so really we want to better align with our land use plan, which really talked a lot about, I know it was pre-COVID, a little bit about large format retail, but really restaurants and really medical related uses, which there's still a lot of demand for medical related uses. A lot of medical related uses want to locate in sort of retail areas. And so we have to be very strategic, because if our retail sort of heavy commercial traffic areas develop with other types of uses, these medical uses may go elsewhere. And again, a lot of times we're talking about highest and best use, medical office, and that is certainly near at the top of that list. This is just the initial step. It's a fairly easy code change for staff to make. Again, zoning code rewrite, evaluating that zoning code that was written, quite a while ago, and updating some of those uses. We would anticipate that there's more sort of changes where those uses are going to be permissible and what's going to be allowed where. This is just a first step. Why are we making this step? Well, I can tell you that I've received, probably at least a dozen phone calls about various properties with auto-related uses. Planning Commission has approved a couple of auto-related applications recently. So again, we're facing that point where we need to better align our zoning code with what our vision is of the city. Now, when we say that, again, we can't. And I apologize, I didn't put this on presentation, so my apologies there. But the properties that we're talking about are here in the orange and in the green, community commercial and what's called CC2, which stands for community commercial modified. The way that zoning is written, it just says all the uses in community commercial are allowable. So the areas that would be affected for the most part are the north part of Hamilton Road, and then Granville and the Agler Johnstown Road area. Those are the parcels that, as of today, some of those auto-related uses would be allowed by conditional use, now would no longer be allowable. You may be asking yourself, what does that mean if I have an auto-related use and my zoning no longer allows for it? It's very common that zoning codes get updated and uses are added and uses are subtracted from what's permissible. If you operate an auto-related use and it's no longer permissible within that zoning, you can continue to operate that as long as you like. What you cannot do is expand that use without rezoning or some other type of approval. So again, you can continue to operate. You cannot, though, expand that use without some additional level of permission from the city. So where would the use be permissible? These uses, there we go. So here's the general areas where auto-related uses that we would be restricting, where they would be permissible. This is a little deceiving because the turquoise area here, that's zone PUD, which is plan unit development. You can have residential PUDs and you can have commercial PUDs. The vast majority of the PUDs in Gahanna are used for residential purposes. If you can see my mouse, the area here along Hamilton Road, this is where the Kroger, McDonald's, Tim Horton, Huntington Bank, that area, that's the commercial part of that particular plan unit development. Those uses would be permissible there. And then here we have sort of the Morrison Road, Hamilton Road area where like the Bob Evans and some of those hotels are located. Again, those uses would be allowed there. The code change is approved. And then the main area, we were just talking about the crescent, that's here in green. And then we have the area in red. That part of the city is zoned Office, Commerce, and Technology, OCT. A lot of industrial, a lot of outdoor activities. That's an additional reason why a lot of zoning codes don't allow for auto-related uses in areas in close proximity to residential. Community commercial typically is in close proximity to residential. There's a lot of noises associated with auto-related uses because of the type of equipment, the banging and so forth that they're doing. Certainly if you have auto repair and it's a body shop, there's going to be a lot of noises. Sometimes the uses are unsightly because you have cars that are damaged, inoperable, tires and things like that being stored outside. A lot of those activities are more akin to some light industrial storage or really office and those types of uses. So again, we have to allow these uses somewhere. As you can see from this particular zoning map, we allow them in a significant part of the city. So it's not like we're restricting their ability to locate here. Obviously, we need these types of uses. We're just being a little bit more strategic. At least that's the intent of the code change. Planning Commission did see this item June 23rd. They did unanimously recommend approval. They were so enthusiastic about the zoning code change that they said it would be okay with them if City Council wanted to approve it on waiver and emergency. We're not asking for that, but again, they were just tickled pink about these changes. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions on the penultimate item on tonight's agenda.
Any questions?
Nancy, if I may.
Sure.
Michael, thank you for bringing this much needed change to some of our code. I wholeheartedly support it. Couple questions though. As I was going down the list, 752 automobile parking. Why not just delete that one too?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we could. I think the thought process is that as of right now, automobile parking, we're not a big city, so we don't have, for the most part, pay parking lots and things of that nature. So in leaving it in doesn't really negatively affect us because we don't really have that use, which, obviously, it could happen. But just because we didn't have that use, we decided to leave that in there. I don't believe it would create any harm if we excluded that use, though.
Okay, that scares me, especially in the Johnstown area. Then I was just questioning 751. It's automotive rentals and leasing without drivers, and that sort of was like, huh? Does that mean like enterprise rental or something, or?
That is, so all those reference numbers and those terms, the way our zoning code's written is very unique because it references all sorts of different manuals and things. So in the community commercial zone district, those numbers correspond to the SIC code, which is the standard industrial classification manual, which is on the department, the census no, the Department of Labor, I believe, is where that language coexists. So they define what those are. And Councilman, you're exactly right. That would be your Hertz and your other types of enterprise and that. And we do have one of those uses within the Stone Ridge Plaza, and that is Zone Community Commercial 2, the Community Commercial Modified. So that could be negatively affected by that code change. So we decided to leave it in because of that particular use.
Understood. So I don't know where this fits, if this fits into this discussion or maybe a different discussion, but here on the west side, we from time to time we have semi trucks that just show up and start parking, and the rural men are parking, or they park off of Agler, and they're noisy because they start up at 3 or 4 a.m. and I hear about it, and then therefore I transfer it to you guys. How do we get this out of our area?
That's an excellent question, and I'm searching for the right answers. It's like you're aware, it's probably mostly a code enforcement issue, but there's a lot of variables there where I don't believe that there's anything from a zoning or non-zoning code standpoint that would prohibit. And again, I might be ignorant, but based off of my experience in various things, I'm not aware of anything that says a semi truck couldn't park in like the Royal Manor, Royal Plaza parking area in a commercial parking lot. But if somebody is parking a vehicle in a road, on a road, that would be, if it's in the right of way, then it would be up to PD police to investigate that. Several areas of the city that comes up every now and again, and that I know they've taken steps to put it like no parking signs and things like of that nature. One of the things that code enforcement deals with frequently are commercial vehicles being parked in residential areas. Now, there is very specific code related to that. Just to do a little bit of a deep dive on that particular question there, is that when it is in a residential area, there are some provisions that allows for it on temporary basis. And then there's some restrictions based off of the size. So if it's under a certain tonnage or weight, I think it's like 6,530 pounds. It's some number that probably means something. It doesn't mean anything to me. Then it's allowed to be there. But if we're talking like the semi trucks, obviously it would be over that limit on the weight of a vehicle. But they are allowed to have commercial vehicles in residential areas for short periods of time. It's sort of honestly, it's a little bit of a cat and mouse game trying to catch folks. I know that's something that our code enforcement officers have worked very diligently on, trying to catch those, because that's part of those repeat offenders that we talk about. It seems like some of those folks, because of their line of work, they're parking those commercial vehicles in residential areas. So that's a long-winded way of saying we have more code and more ability to tackle that issue in a residential area, or in a right-of-way, a little bit less in a commercial parking area, just like in a shopping center and that.
Understood. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Great, really good.
All right. We will have this on for first reading. And then bring it back to committee only in case the other two council members have questions or comments. So we will not have waiver in emergency. Sorry.
That's perfectly fine. We're not asking for it. Thank you all very much for your time this evening. I very much
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next, items from council office.
Hi, Nancy. This is Crystal.
Okay.
These two items, I just lumped them both together because we received them a day apart. But they're two liquor permit requests. One is for Sexton's Pizza, which is located at 943 East Johnstown. And this is for a new liquor permit. And the Social Nail Bar, which is located at 362 South Hamilton Road. This is also a request for a new liquor permit. We have no objections from the police department.
Is this one separate from the polished nail bar, or is it the same? There's one right along there too that's called, are these two separate ones?
So they did have a liquor permit, but I'm not sure if Polished Nail Bar has changed hands, if they're changing companies, because the DBA that's listed as nail salon, it doesn't list Polished Nail Salon on there.
Okay. I just remember because at first I thought it was a Polish nail salon and I couldn't imagine what that was.
I did too.
It was Polish nail salon.
And then I thought, why do people need a liquor permit to get their nails done? But now I understand.
It's all about where the accent goes, you know. I'm sorry.
Oh God.
Okay, so so it's just, this is more informational, right? Unless we have
Yeah. So unless if someone has an objection, so typically if the police department had an objection to go before council, then council would have a motion to formally request a hearing or deny the permit. So if you all are fine with it, then I just send a letter to the Department of Liquor Control saying that we have no objections.
Okay. Anybody have objections? I don't think anybody has objections. Okay, all right. Well, then I will see you all in council chambers next Tuesday, not Monday, because it's a federal holiday. But
Hey,
Tuesday.
Nancy,
Yes.
just a quick item. I'll follow up with an email to all of council, but I will not be here next week. I will miss the July 6th and the July 12th meetings. My family we're going with my brother and his family, and we're going to Alaska. And we're going to be hiking in the mountains in Alaska, and I'm going to be in remote places. I'm not available. So.
Leave
Well,
your phone at home.
that sounds like a great trip. And I want to thank Crystal and for helping me this week, because Brian was unavailable and he was in the mountains. I was in southeastern Ohio. Like Lori said, I'd drive 20 or 30 minutes to get cell service. So Crystal really helped out this week and made some decisions. So if anything, everything went great. So I appreciate that, Crystal. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Nancy.
Lori,
I did, and I'm sorry for bringing this up, but I just wanted to share this with all of you. I don't know if any of you knew Steve Nye. Steve Nye, Gahanna resident, long time ran the Greater Columbus swim team, would always hold the big Gahanna swim tournament over at GSP, usually the week of blues and jazz until we convinced him to move it the week before. Steve unfortunately passed away over the weekend, and he was diagnosed with a very aggressive form of cancer, and that's a great loss for our community. He did so much for our Gahanna residents and worked with our Parks and Recs department for many years, and our condolences go to his family. We will miss him in our community, but I wanted all of you to be aware of that as well, since I'm sure there'll be funeral arrangements will be before we're together again next week, but I did want to pass that along to you because I'm sure you'll want to convey your sympathies as well to his family after his service to our community for so many years.
Thank you. I definitely will.
Thanks, Lori.
I was talking to my daughters today. Her kids, some of my grandkids swam for him last winter at the academy. And he really helped those kids through COVID. I mean, he made it available. They could come this week or that week or this day or that day. And he really made it very accessible so the kids could, and he kept them very safe. They had followed all the protocols. And I mean, you guys, you couldn't even walk up at the academy. You had to walk down this sidewalk, going this way and come back the other sidewalk and always have a mask on. And he really did, make it so the kids had an outlet and could keep up with their swim training. So that was very much appreciated. So, and it's condolences to his family. So, all right. Thanks, Lori, for bringing that up. All right. If nothing else, then we shall be adjourned.
We will see you next week.
We will see you.